Welcome, dear listener. If your day has been noisy and tangled, this is your invitation to step into a different kind of night. Imagine a single oil lamp burning over a table, its light pooling on old maps and sealed letters while shadows lean in to whisper. This is the world of assassination societies, groups that lived on the edges of power and tried to move it with daggers, plots, and quiet courage, or quiet desperation. We will follow them gently, from ancient alleys to high fortresses and onto modern boarding houses where new oaths are sworn. If this cozy story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. Before we go anywhere, imagine your own room for a moment. The dim light, the familiar shapes, the quiet hum of whatever passes for night where you live. Now, very gently let that room widen into another room in another time. A floor of packed earth or uneven stone. A small flame licking at the lip of an oil lamp. The soft rasp of cloth as someone wraps a length of fabric around the hilt of a blade. We are not here to stand over any dramatic scene. We are here to sit in the corner, calm and unhurried, and watch how the idea of the assassination society walks through history like a very patient shadow. When people talk about assassins, they often imagine a single figure. A lone killer on a rooftop or a stranger at a banquet who pulls out a weapon at just the wrong moment for someone else. Stories like that are as old as drama itself, and they certainly happened. Plots in palaces, poisoned cups, daggers under togas. Yet an assassination society is something more sustained, more deliberate. It is what happens when killing becomes a shared craft and a shared story. A group of people bound by oaths or rituals or a sense of higher purpose agree that certain lives must be ended for reasons they tell themselves are larger than any one of them. It might help to think of it in terms of a song. A lone assassin is a single sharp note, startling then gone. An assassination society is a melody that repeats, taught from one person to the next. There are rules about who can join, how messages are sent, how a mission is planned and carried out. There may be symbols that members recognize in a crowded street and secret names that only make sense when spoken in rooms where the shutters are closed. The killings themselves are the most visible part, but to understand these societies, we spend more time in the quieter hours before and after. So let us settle into one of those quieter hours. Picture a city long ago, under foreign rule. The streets are narrow and winding, made of beaten earth or old stone. Houses press close together, their upper floors almost leaning in to whisper to each other over the heads of the people below. Above everything, high on a hill, stands a fortress where soldiers loyal to faraway rulers keep watch. Down below, among market stalls and temple courts, resentment simmers like a pot that has been left on the fire too long. In one small house, behind a curtain, a handful of men speak in low voices. They are angry, but their anger is focused. They believe that their land has been taken, that their laws and faith are being twisted or pushed aside. They do not have armies. They do not have gold piled in vaults. What they have is knowledge of the streets, a willingness to risk everything, and blades that can be hidden in folds of cloth. They become known, at least in later writings, as Sicarii. The word suggests men of the dagger. It hints at steel that disappears into a crowd as quickly as it appears. Most of what we know about them comes from someone who did not like them at all. That is an important detail, and we will return to that kind of problem many times. A historian writing under Roman authority describes the Sicarii as fanatics who used festivals and gatherings as cover. In the crush of a holy day crowd, when everyone jostles shoulder to shoulder, when the air is full of dust and voices and the smell of animals and incense, a man might suddenly cry out and collapse. By the time people realize what happened, the attacker is gone, blade tucked away, face lost among hundreds of others. Once you imagine it, you can also imagine how stories about it might spread. Perhaps your neighbour tells you about an attack he heard about from a cousin in another town. The cousin heard it from someone who was there, though the details change with each retelling. The dagger was silver, or it was bone. The victim cried out, or he died in silence. The killer vanished, or he stood calmly for a moment, then slipped away when everyone else panicked. When danger is hard to see, rumour does half the work. People begin to look over their shoulders in crowded places. Trust wears thin. For the Sicarii themselves, if we take even part of the hostile account seriously, the killings were not random. They were aimed at those seen as collaborators, those who cooperated with the occupying power. Violence was part of a larger struggle over identity and control. It is easy, lying in a modern bed, to think of them as simply villains. It is also easy, from another angle, to romanticize them as pure resistance fighters. The truth is likely muddier and more human. Some were probably deeply devoted. Some may have joined for status among their peers. Some may have been drawn in by fear, or by the promise that an angry world finally made sense inside the circle of the group. This is one of the threads that runs through many assassination societies. Inside the group, the world feels organized. There is an explanation for suffering. There is a reason why this official must die and that landowner must be warned. There might be sacred texts brought into the argument, interpreted in ways that make killing feel like obedience rather than rebellion. There might be rituals before a mission, simple ones like shared food and wine, or more elaborate oaths spoken while touching a symbol or a weapon. Whatever the exact form, the effect is to draw a line between us and them that feels deeper than ordinary politics. If you listen closely to the stories of the Sicarii, you can hear two different heartbeats. One is the beat of fear in the wider population. It is the heartbeat of crowds that wonder if they will be safe in their own holy places. The other is the heartbeat inside the small rooms where plans are whispered. There, someone might trace a finger on a crude map, explaining where the target usually walks during a festival. Someone else might check the edge of a short dagger against the tip of a thumb. Another might repeat a phrase under his breath, a reminder of why he believes this act is necessary. One city, two very different kinds of tension. We should also remember how fragile our knowledge is. Ancient sources are not security camera footage. They are more like the story that one neighbour tells another, dressed up in good grammar and a confident tone. The Roman authorities wanted to show that such groups were dangerous and irrational. The members themselves, if they had written their own chronicle, might have described their actions as sacred and carefully chosen. Time has eaten most of those voices. We are left with fragments and the sharp edges of someone else's opinion. Still, even through that uncertainty, we can see patterns. The Sicarii operated in a setting where power felt very unequal. A mighty empire on one side, local traditions and leadership on the other. When open revolt seemed impossible or suicidal, the logic of the hidden knife was tempting. You cannot storm the fortress on the hill, but you can strike a man who walks among you in the market. An assassination society promises that small groups can suddenly matter in a world otherwise stacked against them. It is a dark sort of hope, but a hope all the same. Now, before this turns into a tangle of names and dates, let us step sideways in time and space for a moment. The idea of organised assassination did not belong only to that one city or that one century. In the Greek world, much earlier, there were stories of citizens who killed tyrants and were later praised as liberators. Their acts were discussed in public spaces, remembered in art and speech. In the Roman world, senators whispered in corridors, weighing the life of a ruler against what they believed to be the health of the state. Those were not really assassination societies. They were more like one-time conspiracies formed among elites, who then returned to normal life if they survived at all. The melody did not repeat often enough to become a constant theme. By contrast, the Sicarii and groups like them took steps towards something more continuous. Even if they were small, even if they lasted only a generation or two, they had the beginnings of an identity that outlived the individual missions. New recruits learned from older members. Certain ways of acting and speaking became habits. The city itself began to feel that it housed not just occasional plots, but a standing community of people dedicated to a particular way of fighting. It is here that we start to glimpse what later, in other lands, will become the fully grown image of the Assassin Brotherhood. Imagine being one of those recruits. Someone you trust takes you aside one day, away from the bright noise of the bazaar. Perhaps you walk together along a narrow lane that smells of spices and old dust, until the sounds of trade fade behind you. You enter a courtyard or a small room where a handful of others are waiting. There is no drum roll, no dramatic speech, perhaps just a few quiet words about loyalty, about the suffering of your people, about the need for courage. Maybe there is a short phrase you must repeat, a gesture you must make, a touch of hand to heart or to blade. You are now part of something that claims to see behind the veil of ordinary life. From that night onward, the city looks different. Crowds still jostle, children still laugh and chase each other between stalls, traders still argue over prices, but you also see routes of escape, blind corners, moments when a target would be vulnerable. You know that in another alley or another town there are other members thinking similar thoughts. The group gives you a lens, and once you look through it, it is hard to take it off. This is another quiet power of assassination societies. Long before any act is carried out, they change how members walk through their world. Of course, belonging to such a group is dangerous. Authorities are not blind, they notice patterns, a certain type of victim, a certain way of dying. They respond with informants, arrests, and public punishments meant to terrify onlookers back into obedience. Fear flows both ways. Members of the society fear betrayal from within. Ordinary people fear both the hidden assassins and the open crackdowns that follow. History often describes this in terms of strategy and counter-strategy, but at street level it feels more like a constant tightening of the chest. When we read about all this from a safe distance, it is tempting to focus on the knives and the dramatic confrontations. Yet the majority of time in an assassination society is spent in waiting. Waiting in doorways, waiting for news, waiting for the right gathering or the right journey to unfold. Waiting with a blade that must remain hidden and unused for weeks or months. You can almost hear that waiting as a steady background hum. The sound of someone sharpening a weapon not because he enjoys it, but because he knows that if the time comes, the smallest slip could mean disaster for everyone. As we linger in this ancient city, it becomes clear that we are standing near the roots of something that will grow in strange directions. Here, assassination is tied closely to faith and occupation. Later, in other times, it will mingle with dynastic politics, with revolutionary ideals, with organised crime. The faces will change, the weapons will change, powder will replace steel, and then explosives will replace powder. Messages will travel by courier, then telegraph, then coded signals sent through electric pulses. Yet beneath those changes, the same old structure remains. Small groups, bound by secrecy and conviction, deciding that certain deaths are not crimes at all, but offerings to a cause. For tonight, though, we stay here a little longer. Listen to the murmur of voices in a courtyard where a plan is being shaped. Hear the distant clatter of hooves on the road to the fortress, where soldiers ride out on a patrol that might never meet the men who worry them most. Overhead, the sky is the same as the one you see now if you look out of your own window. The same stars, though scattered in a different pattern of stories. In that sky, history is just a faint drift. On the ground, in these dim rooms, decisions are being made that will echo much farther than anyone here can guess. Soon, in another chapter, we will climb higher into the mountains to visit a different community whose name will echo in European tales for centuries. There, in strongholds perched on cliffs like stone ships at sea, another brotherhood will refine the art of the chosen killing and wrap it in discipline and theology. Before we go there, let the light in this low room fade. The men return their daggers to their places. The curtain falls back over the doorway. Outside, the city exhales, unaware for the moment of the sharp intentions hidden in its own narrow streets. When we left the last city, we stepped away from narrow alleys and hidden daggers. Now the ground tilts upward beneath your feet. The streets thin out, then vanish, and the path becomes a mountain track. Loose stones slide under your boots. The air grows colder and cleaner with each breath. Above you, against a pale sky, a dark shape clings to the cliff. Walls, towers, and terraces stacked like a handful of stone blocks pressed into the rock by an unseen hand. This is the kind of place where an assassination society becomes legend. Imagine arriving here before dawn. The world below is still mostly dark. A faint grey washes along the far horizon, just enough light to sketch the outline of peaks and valleys. Up close you can see the rough grain of the stone steps, worn down by generations of feet, and the dark streaks where rain has traced its fingers. A gate stands ahead, not huge, but solid. Above it, a banner hangs limp in the thin morning air, its fabric faded by years of sun. Inside waits a community that later outsiders will call the Assassins, though they knew themselves quite differently. In this high place, where supplies have to be hauled up by stubborn animals on winding paths, every object matters. Barrels of grain stacked in dry storerooms, jars of oil and sacks of salt. Battered shields hung along a wall, bows strung and ready, quivers lined up like quiet sentries. In the centre of it all, the stronghold's heart, a hall where leaders consult maps and letters. There is nothing glamorous about most of this. It smells of smoke, sweat, and stone dust. It sounds like clanking buckets, clattering hooves, murmured prayers, and the occasional shout of a guard to stay awake. Yet from this dense, practical world of logistics and routines, a very refined kind of fear will travel far. The people who lived in these fortresses were part of the Nizari Ismaili community, a branch of a branch in the wider tree of the Islamic world. Their story is complex and tangled with theology, dynastic disputes, and questions of rightful leadership. For our sleepy purposes, it is enough to know that they saw themselves as a small devoted group living amid much larger and often hostile powers. Seljuk rulers to the east and west, Crusader states sprinkled along the Mediterranean, the vast weight of the Abbasid Caliphate. In that crowded field of powers, the Nizaris did not have the luxury of great armies. Instead, they built outposts in places that were hard to reach and harder to seize. From these eyries, they nurtured a strategy built more on precision than numbers. When a neighbouring ruler threatened them, they might not send an army to meet his. Instead, a handful of men, sometimes only one, would be dispatched, not in full armour, but in a disguise that fit the target's world. A servant, a soldier, a wandering holy man. The mission would be planned calmly under lamplight, with maps and messengers and coded instructions. Then the chosen envoy would descend from the cold stone heights into the warmer, flatter lands where people barely knew such a fortress existed. Later, European travellers and storytellers would take this basic pattern and embroider it into something wild. They spoke of fanatics drugged with strange herbs, led into gardens filled with fountains, fruit trees, and beautiful communions, then told that this was a taste of paradise. When the drug wore off and the young men found themselves back in the grey stone of the fortress, their leader would promise them a return to that delight if they died in his service. It is a vivid story, the kind that sticks even after a long day when your brain is too tired for complicated plots. It has gardens, promises, and a tidy moral about manipulation. Modern historians are more cautious. There is very little solid evidence for these elaborate initiation scenes. It is more likely that outsiders, especially crusaders and rival Muslim writers, misunderstood Nizari practices, or simply invented details to explain why their own leaders seemed so afraid of these mountain dwellers. Still, the garden story spread. Over time it hardened into folk wisdom. People who had never seen a Nizari fortress, or met a single member of the community, felt they knew exactly how it all worked up there among the clouds. It is a reminder of how stories about assassination societies often tell you more about the fears of their neighbours than about the societies themselves. Inside the fortress, life would have looked less like a fever dream and more like the daily grind of any disciplined community. Teachers instructing students in theology and law, scribes copying texts by the steady light of oil lamps, guards walking patrol routes at precise intervals, boots scuffing on the same stones at the same times, kitchens turning out simple meals, bread and stews to keep everyone moving. Somewhere in that routine, a much smaller circle met to discuss threats and options. It is there, in these private councils, that the deliberate use of assassination took shape. Picture one of those meetings, a thick wool rug on the floor to keep out the chill of the stone, a low table scattered with letters, some torn open, some sealed. Men sit leaning forward, hands on knees, speaking in measured tones. The names of enemies and potential allies move across the room like pieces on a board. One man suggests negotiation, another points out that a certain neighbouring power will not rest until this mountain stronghold falls. The talk turns to individuals, a governor, a general, a judge, not the faceless machinery of an empire, but specific people whose absence might change the direction of that machinery. A decision is made. A single life will be targeted instead of 1,000 lives on a battlefield. For the chosen envoy, the path ahead is long and quiet. He may spend days or weeks travelling through valleys and market towns, blending in among traders and pilgrims. There is nothing cinematic about most of this journey. Feet ache, clothes gather dust. He eats rough bread and whatever stew is available at roadside inns. At night he lies awake on thin bedding, listening to snores and coughing, reviewing the plan in his mind. Where he will stand, what he will say if questioned, how he will keep his hand steady when the moment arrives. In some accounts, Nizari envoys were known for their patience. They could live for months or years near their intended target, working as servants or guards, quietly building trust. That trust was the key. It meant access to private spaces, moments when the target would be relaxed and unguarded, surrounded by familiar faces. The envoy learned routines the way a musician learns a song. When would the man pray? When would he go to the bath? Which path would he take to the council chamber? Each small habit was a note in the melody of his life. The mission depended on knowing that melody so well that even its smallest variations could be predicted. The actual act, when it came, was usually swift, a knife at close range in a place where escape was unlikely. Sometimes sources say the envoy did not even try to flee. His death was accepted as part of the plan, and his willingness to die reinforced the idea that these mountain followers were utterly committed. To people on the outside, this looked like frightening fanaticism, something almost inhuman. Inside the community, it was likely framed as sacrifice, as the highest proof of loyalty and faith. The same act can wear very different meanings depending on who is telling the story and from how far away. As tales of these missions spread, the name of the community itself began to blur. In European languages, the word assassin emerged, shaped from attempts to pronounce their name and from rumours about drug use. Over centuries, that word drifted far from its original setting. It has become a label for any hidden killer in fictional game, stripped of its specific history. You can almost imagine someone from that mountain palace, transported into a modern living room, staring in confusion at a television or a console game where the word is used for characters who leap off impossibly high towers into conveniently placed haystacks. The real path of the envoy was slower, colder, and had no reset button. While the Nizaris were making their high stone homes into centres of disciplined, strategic violence, other parts of the world were nurturing their own specialists in the art of moving unseen. Travel with your mind's eye now to a different landscape. Mist curls over terraced fields and wooded hillsides. Wooden houses cluster along narrow roads. A castle rises here too, though built of timber and plaster rather than sheer stone, its layered roofs tilting gracefully into the sky. This is the world of the Japanese shinobi, whom modern culture has turned into the almost mythical ninja. Unlike the Nizari strongholds, shinobi bases were not always dramatic fortresses. The people skilled in stealth and infiltration could live as ordinary villagers, blending in among farmers and craftsmen. During periods of constant warfare, certain families and regions gained reputations for providing reliable agents who could slip behind enemy lines, gather intelligence, sabotage supplies, and, when ordered, remove specific individuals. Their tools were practical rather than magical. Grappling hooks, rope ladders, short swords, simple dark clothing rather than colourful armour that would glitter in moonlight. In the cool of the night, a shinobi might cross a tiled roof with careful toe-fur steps, pausing when a guard's lantern swept past a courtyard. He would smell damp wood, hear the crickets in the grass below, feel the rough grain of roof tiles under his fingers. The mission could be as simple as listening at a paper-thin wall to hear plans discussed, or as drastic as slipping into a sleeping chamber to end a life. Later writers would give these figures supernatural powers, the ability to vanish in a puff of smoke or walk on water. The reality was more muscular and more anxious. Rope burns on hands, legs trembling after a long climb, breaths counted carefully to stay quiet. Like the Nizaris, the shinobi did not usually form a single worldwide brotherhood. They were part of a patchwork of lords and retainers, hired and dismissed as the political winds shifted. Their loyalty was tangled with pay, with local ties, and with the intricate web of honour that governed their society. Yet to outsiders, especially those who suffered sudden losses blamed on unseen culprits, it was tempting to imagine a vast hidden network of killers who owed allegiance only to their own secret code. Once again, rumour took scattered facts and stitched them into a cloak big enough to cover every unexplained event. Further to the west, in parts of China, secret brotherhoods mixed ritual, mutual aid, and at times targeted violence. In busy port cities and rural market towns, men gathered in back rooms of tea houses to swear oaths over incense smoke. They pledged to support one another, to defend their shared values, sometimes to resist corrupt officials or foreign intrusions. Most of their activities may have been small-scale, helping members find work, defending a neighbourhood from bandits, but when tensions rose, when taxes bit hard or foreign troops appeared in the streets, some of these bonds could harden into plans for bloodshed. A magistrate might be attacked in a lonely lane, a rival leader might vanish. To government eyes, these scattered acts seemed to glow with the same threatening light, and all were blamed on a single network of sworn brothers. If you listen carefully, you can hear the same tune playing in all these settings. The instruments differ. In one place, stone fortresses and theological debates. In another, misty valleys and codes of honour. In another, incense and red paper charms. Yet the melody is familiar. Small groups carve out spaces where loyalty is intense and secrecy is essential. They believe that by striking carefully chosen targets, they can protect their community or reshape the wider world. Their enemies, lacking clear sight into these closed circles, imagine entire worlds of darkness behind the curtain. It's worth pausing for a moment on that recurring gap between inside and outside. To a Nizari envoy in a host's household, the mission feels like the outcome of long study and prayer. To the host, if he ever suspects, it feels like a betrayal of trust so deep it is almost unthinkable. To a crusader hearing rumours of silent killers, it becomes proof that the people in the mountains are not just theologically wrong but morally monstrous. A single act can be simultaneously duty, treachery and horror, depending on where you stand. Assassination societies thrive in that gap. The thick fog of misunderstanding and fear around them is almost as protective as their stone walls or hidden valleys. Back in the mountain stronghold, the day moves on. Sunlight finally crests the peaks and pours into the courtyard, setting the stone to a pale, watchful glow. Children run errands between buildings, carrying baskets or messages, their feet slapping on the worn slabs. Women draw water from cisterns and talk in low tones. Men train with bows on a terrace where the mountain drops away into dizzying depth. Somewhere inside, another council begins, another letter is opened, another map is consulted. The decision makers here know that their community's survival depends not on numbers, but on reputation. If those who threaten them believe that a hand can reach them at any time, even in their most guarded rooms, they may hesitate. Fear becomes a kind of defensive moat. From your place as observer, you remain at a safe distance. You feel the mountain wind on your face, hear the cry of a bird wheeling far below, and sense the strange combination of serenity and tension that hangs over this place. It is a monastery and a fortress at once, a school and an arsenal. The people who live here tend their gardens and their goats, read their texts, raise their children, and occasionally send someone down the long road with a quiet, deadly assignment. In time, many of these fortresses will fall. Siege warfare will slowly grind them down. Treachery will open gates from within. Changing political landscapes will make their existence more fragile. The Nizari communities will adapt, move, and endure in other forms. The specific pattern of the High Assassin Castle will fade into history. Yet the stories born here are stubborn. They travel in the mouths of soldiers, chroniclers and travellers. They curl into the ears of listeners who have never climbed a mountain or felt the chill stone of a fortress wall. As we leave this place, the stones underfoot grow warmer in the afternoon light. You descend the path in your imagination, away from the eagles and the banners, back toward lower lands. The legend of the assassins has settled into your mind not as a burst of violence, but as a long, slow process of planning, belief and daily life in an extreme setting. Ahead on the horizon, other landscapes wait. Plains crossed by caravans, islands of wood and water crisscrossed by small boats, towns where tea houses hum with whispered oaths and coded songs. In the next part of our wandering, we will walk those roads. We will sit by a cooking fire at the side of a dusty track and listen to men who claim that knots and signs can bind them in brotherhood. We will glance into colonial offices, where worried officials try to pin these shadows to paper. For now, you can let the mountain fade. Picture the fortress from a distance, a small stubborn mark against the endless rock. Then let even that mark soften until it is only a memory. Above you the sky stretches on, patient and pale, as if it has seen many such strongholds rise and crumble and will see many more. long after you have closed your eyes for the night. The mountain fortress is behind you now. Its stone walls have shrunk to a dark memory on a distant ridge. Under your feet, the ground has levelled out into something much more familiar in human history, a road. It is the evening on a long route that crosses the Indian subcontinent. Dust hangs in the air, turning the last light of the day into a soft gold haze. A small group of travellers has made camp under a few sparse trees. There is the thin crackle of a fire fed with scrubwood. Someone ties up a scrawny horse. Someone else stirs a pot that smells of lentils and spices. Strangers sit in a loose circle, their faces lit from below by the flames, telling each other where they are going and why, the way travellers have always done in places where night comes without street lamps. On the surface, everything here is ordinary. A merchant counting coins in his head, a pilgrim fingering a string of beads, a pair of brothers sharing a blanket and joking about how hard the ground is. Yet 19th century British officers will later insist that such camps also hid members of a vast secret brotherhood. They called them thugs, from a word for deceivers, and described them as ritual killers who strangled unsuspecting victims and buried them by the roadside. In their stories, these men were part of a network that stretched across regions and languages, bound together by oaths to a dark goddess and by a shared method of killing. The reality, as far as careful historians can untangle it, is more complicated. There were indeed dangerous bands who preyed on travellers, lured them into false friendship, and then attacked when the moment was right. Robbery on lonely roads is a very old trade. Some of these groups followed traditions that gave their acts a ritual frame. They might avoid spilling blood to leave less evidence. They might share stories that described their work as a kind of grim duty. At the same time, British officials in a strange land were often fearful and eager to show that they were bringing order to chaos. The result was a picture in which scattered bands of robbers and killers were woven together into one enormous sinister tapestry. Let us step closer to this campfire and listen carefully. A man with a worn scarf around his neck finishes his food and begins to hum a tune. Another joins in. The melody is simple, the words hard to catch. Are they just a folk song, something to pass time, or are they coded phrases that mark membership in a hidden brotherhood? An officer reading a confession in a court might say the latter, pointing to lines about fate and loyalty. A sceptical modern reader might suspect that such meanings were pulled out later, under pressure, when prisoners said what their interrogators expected to hear. Some British accounts describe a ritual of recruitment. A newcomer, they say, would be slowly drawn into the group. He would first help with smaller tasks, then be present at a killing, and only later be asked to take part. At certain points he might be invited to share in a symbolic oath, perhaps around a food offering, perhaps with hands placed over a simple object like a pickaxe or a knotted cloth. These descriptions may be coloured by imagination, yet it is easy to see why they appealed. They turned frightening but messy roadside crimes into something that could be explained, catalogued, and combated. Once you name a brotherhood, you feel as if you have grasped it. Objects play an important role in these stories. The most famous is the length of cloth used for strangling. Imagine that cloth now, folded and refolded, soft from long use, riding into the bottom of a bundle with spare clothing. In the hands of a labourer, it might be just another tool, useful for tying loads or shading the head. In the reports of colonial officers, it becomes a signature weapon, the sign of a special class of criminal. The same with small metal charms, with gestures, with words in unfamiliar languages. Each becomes a clue in a growing theory. In a cluttered office many miles away, an investigator dips a pen into ink and begins to write. He has interrogated dozens of suspects and collected countless stories. The walls around him are lined with shelves, each shelf with boxes, each box with reports. Outside, crows argue in the branches of a dusty tree. Inside, the man draws straight lines through this confusion. He marks some names as leaders, some as initiates, some as long-time members. 100 separate robberies become proof of a grand design. The largest danger for him is not a hidden knife. It is the temptation to believe that the map in his mind is more orderly than the world itself. Today, when people look back on the thuggy suppression campaigns, many see a mixture of truths. There were robber bands and killers, some of whom used shared rituals and songs to bind themselves together. Some may genuinely have seen their acts through a religious lens. At the same time, British administrators used the idea of a huge, organised cult to justify new laws and deeper interference in local society. A frightening story can be a very effective tool of governance. If you can tell London that you have defeated a centuries-old brotherhood, it sounds more impressive than simply saying you have chased down some highway robbers. Out at the roadside camp, none of this paperwork is visible. The fire burns low. One by one, travellers stretch out on their blankets. Somewhere a horse shakes its head and makes its tack jingle softly. A man lies awake, listening, fingers resting on a knotted cloth hidden under his thin pillow. Another man lies awake for a different reason. He has heard tales of bandits and is new to this route. He wonders if the people he met today will still be alive tomorrow. Fear curls in both directions, predator and prey. The night air is cool and the stars look down on people who do not know how famous their shadows will become in foreign reports. From these roads and camps, let your mind drift eastward and a little forward in time to the edge of another empire. Here the paths are not dusty tracks, but busy lanes leading into Chinese towns and ports. Lanterns glow at doorways. Boatmen shout on dark canals. In a back room of a crowded tea house, away from the clatter of cups and conversation, a different kind of gathering is underway. The air is thick with the smell of tea leaves and incense. A small altar holds simple offerings. On the table lie slips of red paper, a shallow bowl, and a knife whose blade catches the lamplight for just a moment. Men here speak of brotherhood and mutual aid. Some work on docks, some in small workshops and some in markets. Life is precarious, wages are low, and the line between respectability and disgrace is thin. Joining a secret society, which outsiders will later call a triad, offers a sense of belonging. There are elaborate initiation ceremonies, filled with symbolic steps and phrases that claim ancient roots. Oaths are sworn to support fellow members, to uphold certain moral values, and sometimes to oppose unjust officials or foreign powers. To the men kneeling on the floor, repeating the words, it feels like entering a family that stretches far beyond their own relatives. Most of the time, the work of these societies is not the stuff of dramas. It might involve helping a newcomer find a place to sleep, arranging loans, or providing support when a member is in trouble. In crowded ports, however, where trade is heavy and smuggling is tempting, some branches of these brotherhoods slide into organised crime. Rival groups jostle for control of gambling dens or opium supplies. A boss who stands in the way of a profitable arrangement might find himself threatened. A policeman who presses too hard might be ambushed. Targeted violence becomes another tool in the chest, alongside coded signs and ritual meetings. From the point of view of government authorities, this world looks like a tangle of shadows. Reports filter in from informers who may or may not be telling the truth. A fight in a street might be personal, or it might be part of a long-standing feud between rival lodges. A letter with obscure phrases might be a shopping list, or it might be a message of warning. In colonial treaty ports and later in overseas communities, officials who grew anxious about unrest often described triads as if they were a single giant organisation reaching across oceans. In reality, these groups varied widely, splitting, merging and adapting as conditions changed. If you sit quietly in that tea house for a while, you begin to notice the details that matter to participants rather than to officials. A shared touch of fingers to forehead and chest before drinking. The careful folding of red paper with written vows. The way older members gently correct younger ones on the order of ritual phrases. These acts create the feeling that the group is ancient and unbreakable, even if its actual history is short and its membership fluid. When a serious decision is made, such as whether to threaten a rival or protect a member who has angered the authorities, it is done in this heavy-scented, lamp-lit room with all its layers of symbol. If someone dies as a result, a knife in a crowd or a blow delivered in a narrow alley, the story of that act will quickly take on different shapes. Among members, it may be told as justice done, a necessary message. Among the public, it may be told as proof that the Brotherhood is heartless. Among officials, it may become another line on a chart of subversive networks. A single life once again becomes three different kinds of story. Now let us cross again, this time toward the Mediterranean, where rugged hills rise up from the sea and small villages cling to slopes like clusters of stoneberries. In some of these places, in Corsica, in parts of southern Italy, in certain Balkan valleys, another tradition of targeted killing has long haunted the landscape. This is the world of the vendetta, the feud between families or clans that can endure for generations. It is not usually organised into formal societies with names and rituals, yet the effect can be similar. There are unwritten rules about who may be attacked, when and for what reasons. There are expectations of loyalty that override the instructions of church or state. Imagine a small square in a hill village. The afternoon sun bounces off whitewashed walls. A few old men sit on a bench, watching the world with the patient eyes of those who have seen too many arguments. A young man crosses the square carrying firewood. Another young man, from a family with whom his own has long been at odds, leans against a doorway. Their eyes meet. An insult from years ago, a killing with roots in a dispute over land or honour, sits in the space between them like an invisible stone. Some feuds end in negotiated peace. Others end in blood, drawn according to patterns known only to those inside the quarrel. In these settings, there is often no secret lodge room, no coded song. The oaths are spoken at kitchen tables, in fields, on mountain paths. A father might tell a son that there are people he must never trust, families he must avoid, names he must remember. When violence occurs, it is often explained not as murder, but as a rightful response to an old injury. This law of the state, with its judges and police, becomes one voice among several, and not always the loudest. For outsiders, whether visiting officials or modern tourists, tales of vendetta can sound like something from a grim folk tale. Yet for those who live with them, they are woven into daily decisions: which path to take home, which wedding to attend, whether to accept an offer of mediation. The pattern of targeted killing here emerges not from formal societies, but from dense webs of kinship and memory. Still, the resemblance to assassination brotherhoods is there in the careful choice of targets and the sense that certain acts are demanded by a code higher than ordinary law. Across all these examples, a similar figure appears in the background, the agent of empire or central government trying to make sense of what he sees. In an Indian cantonment, a British officer stares at a map of roads and marks it with pins for Thuggee attacks. In a Chinese treaty port, a foreign consular official takes notes from a local policeman who tries to explain the difference between one lodge of sworn brothers and another. In a southern European city, a magistrate reviews reports of a killing and wonders whether it is a simple crime or part of a feud that has smouldered longer than his own career. Often these officials think in boxes and lines. They create categories and charts. They ask of every violent act whether it belongs to a known society, a known plot, a known code. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes they mistake coincidence for coordination. Sometimes they underestimate the strength of a network, and sometimes they greatly exaggerate it. Either way, their reports feed back into the wider imagination. Newspapers in far-off capitals print stories about exotic cults, mysterious brotherhoods, savage feuds. Readers who will never travel beyond their own region form vivid mental pictures of roads, tea houses, and mountain villages where death walks in ritual patterns. Meanwhile, the world is changing under everyone's feet. Railways begin to crisscross landscapes that were once only reachable by long foot journeys. Telegraph lines hum with dots and dashes that carry news much faster than any rider could. A killing that once might have been known only to a local community can now be reported in a city newspaper within days or hours. East India Company officers, Qing officials, European magistrates, and their modernising counterparts are all slowly learning to share information with one another. Secret societies must adapt to this new speed, or vanish. Some adopt the new technologies for their own use. Messages travel by train, hidden among cargo. Code words are telegraphed between towns and ports. Leaders use the growing confusion of city life as cover for their meetings. Yet there is also a sense that the space for an old-style assassination society is shrinking. State power is no longer just a distant fortress or a single roadblock. It's a web of laws, rail lines, and papers stamped and filed in triplicate. A small group can still do harm, can still frighten, but it struggles more than before to remain invisible. And yet, in the quiet hours of night, the old patterns persist. On a roadside in India, a trader pulls his blanket closer against the chill and wonders about the man sleeping a few feet away. In a Chinese port, a dock worker hesitates outside a tea house door, deciding whether to join the brotherhood that has promised to protect him. In a hill village, an old woman leans over the hearth and murmurs a family story that hints at an old wrong not yet forgiven. These private decisions, taken in small rooms and open camps, keep feeding the stream of history with acts that will later be analysed in heavy books and official reports. Standing where you are, somewhere above and outside all these scenes, you can begin to see how the colonial and early modern world has threaded assassination societies and targeted killings into its fabric. The groups we have visited are diverse. Some are bound by ritual oaths in smoky back rooms. Some are held together by fear and the promise of loot. Some grow out of deep kin ties and a sense of honour insulted. What links them is the belief that killing particular people in a controlled way can preserve a community, express a grievance, or tilt the balance of power ever so slightly. Soon, as the 19th century gives way to the 20th, those beliefs will move into new spaces. Boarding houses in capital cities will replace roadside camps. Secret police files will grow as thick as the old colonial boxes. Bombs, pistols, and pamphlets will join daggers and knotted cloths as tools for small groups who dream of changing the world. But for now, listen to the crackle of that roadside fire one more time. The stories told there are half boast, half warning, half comfort, which is one half too many, but the night is forgiving. The embers sink low. One by one the travellers drift into sleep. Somewhere in the distance, maybe on another road entirely, a train whistle cries out like a metal bird announcing the new age rolling forward. You can let that sound fade as well. The knots, the roads, the watching empires all grow distant, filed away like so many reports in a forgotten cabinet. Ahead, another room waits, with wallpaper, a gas lamp, and a table scattered with pamphlets. But you do not have to enter it yet. You can pause here on the quiet edge of the road, feeling the cool air on your face and rest. The road has turned to rails and cobblestones now. The dust of old caravan routes settles behind us, and in its place rises the muted hum of a 19th century city. Imagine a narrow street somewhere in Europe. The stones are damp from a recent rain. Gas lamps glow in a soft row, their light caught in puddles and on wet bricks. Up a flight of creaking wooden stairs, in a boarding house that smells faintly of boiled cabbage and coal smoke, a door stands almost closed. A yellow slice of lamplight spills across the hallway floor. Inside that room, a different kind of brotherhood is taking shape. The wallpaper is faded, patterned with the little flowers that have seen better days. A small iron stove ticks as it cools. On the table lie a few chipped cups, a dented teapot, and heaps of paper. Some sheets are handwritten, some are set in a roughly printed type. Slogans march across them in uneven lines. Freedom, justice, the people. You can almost smell the ink, sharp and slightly metallic. 3 or 4 young men and women sit or stand in this cramped space, shoulders tense, eyes bright with too little sleep and too much talking. They are not monks or mountain warriors or roadside robbers. They are students, clerks, minor officials, and yet, in their minds, they are also something else. A cell. Here, the assassination society has taken on a new shape. It is no longer a public legend passed from mouth to mouth in markets, nor a whispered terror on lonely roads. It is a quiet strategy discussed over weak tea. These small groups read pamphlets and clandestine newspapers that argue that the structures of their world are rotten. They believe that rulers crush the poor, that outdated empires still stand where something fairer should grow, that the usual channels of change are blocked by privilege and indifference. They talk about strikes, about protests, about speeches, and some of them, on some nights like this one, talk about killing. The idea slides into the room almost casually at first. A name is mentioned. A minister, a governor, a monarch. Someone taps ash from a cheap cigarette into a saucer and says that if this one pillar falls, the whole structure might shake. Another hesitates. Murder is a heavy word, even when wrapped in new slogans. So the language shifts. It becomes an act of justice, a blow against tyranny, a spark for the people. In this way, the pattern we have followed through centuries appears again, wearing a different coat but carrying the same undercurrent. Certain lives are counted as obstacles. Removing them becomes a kind of moral duty inside the circle. In places like the Russian Empire, groups such as Narodnaya Volia, the People's Will, treated assassination almost as a solemn art. They studied bomb-making and marksmanship with the same seriousness that earlier brotherhoods had given to sharpening daggers. They watched the routines of their targets, charting carriage routes and meeting times, counting guards, noting servants. On long winter nights they rehearsed plans in rooms like this one, chalking diagrams on cheap wallpaper, tracing their fingers along imagined paths. Outside, snow and history piled up quietly. Inside, arguments crackled hotter than the stove. Across the continent and beyond, anarchist and nationalist circles were doing similar work in other cramped rooms. In Parisian cafes with fogged windows, in Barcelona back alleys, in small towns across Eastern Europe, people gathered to share a heady mixture of theory and anger. They wrote manifestos in which the world seemed simple. There were oppressors and oppressed, and a bullet or a bomb placed in the right moment might tilt the balance forever. In practice, the world remained stubbornly complicated. Governments responded to high-profile assassinations with more police, more surveillance, more trials. Ordinary citizens responded with both fascination and fear, reading each headline as if it were a chapter in an ongoing serial. On a warm evening in a Balkan city, another kind of society emerges, one that straddles the line between old worlds and new. A group of young officers and students gather in a smoky room above a shop. On the wall hangs a faded patriotic painting. On the table sit a bottle of rough wine, a revolver wrapped in cloth, and a small notebook filled with careful handwriting. These men speak of national liberation, of ancient grievances, of borders drawn without their consent. They create a structure for themselves, with ranks and ceremonies and code names. Later, people will remember one network among them as the Black Hand, a name that sounds almost too neat for the messy blend of idealism, bravado and secrecy that filled these rooms. Here too, targeted killing becomes part of a plan. A member is chosen, or volunteers, to travel to a city, to a parade, to a bridge, where a royal carriage will pass. He is given a weapon, some basic instructions, perhaps a few words that are meant to steady his nerves. The echoes of everything we have already seen are present. The Sicarii in the crowd at a festival. The Nizari envoy who waits for months near a target. The roadside band that decides where to strike. The setting has changed. The tools have changed. The newspapers will soon carry the news to the world. The inner feelings of fear, purpose and doubt are much the same. If you shift your point of view slightly, you begin to see that the walls of the boarding house room are thinner than they look. On the other side of them, in another part of the city, sits a different little circle. This one is composed of police officers, informers and officials in plain coats. They too gather over tables scattered with papers. Their pages hold reports, photographs, coded letters seized in raids. They speak in low voices about cells, networks and plots. To them, the assassination society is an enemy diagrammed in ink, something to be broken into smaller pieces and neutralized. They imagine themselves as surgeons cutting out a disease, or as engineers shoring up a weakened structure. Over time, the tools available to this second circle grow more refined. Files multiply in iron cabinets. New branches of government emerge with names that whisper of secrecy and protection. Intelligence bureaus, special departments. What began as scattered assassination societies run by private actors starts to rub shoulders with violence planned inside the state itself. Governments sponsor agents to act abroad to remove enemies in foreign cities, to send quiet messages through dreadful acts. The line between outlaw and official killer blurs. The ancient art of striking one life to move many is brought under fluorescent lights and stamped with formal authorization. For the old-style brotherhood, with its lodges and rituals, this new world is difficult terrain. A group of men swearing oaths over candles in a basement no longer feels quite so powerful when telephones and trains and central registries hum above them. Some adjust, borrowing methods from the state. They adopt more rigid cell structures, teach members not to know too much about one another, use coded messages that can travel quickly through the new communications web. Others fade, their stories preserved mostly in the worried reports that once tried to suppress them. The idea of the assassination society does not vanish. It dissolves and seeps into larger organizations, into revolutionary parties, intelligence agencies and extremist networks whose roots lie as much in paperwork as in sacred vows. Yet even in the era of central files and recorded calls, some things remain stubbornly human. In every plan for a killing there is still a room. It might be a basement with peeling paint. It might be a tidy office with a map on the wall and a coffee cup leaving rings on a report. People still sit together and argue about whether this person should live or die, whether this act will protect or endanger. whether the story they tell themselves will hold firm when confronted with the real weight of a human life. Secret societies did not invent that awful conversation. They simply built rooms in which it could echo more loudly. So why have such societies appeared again and again, under different banners and in different ages? Part of the answer lies in powerlessness. When people feel that they cannot change their world through votes, petitions, or peaceful protest, the lure of the hidden blade or the concealed pistol grows stronger. Another part lies in the aching human desire to belong to something that feels both secret and significant. A lodge, a cell, a brotherhood offers that. It wraps fear and anger in ceremony, makes individuals feel part of a longer story even when their role is brief and ends badly. From your safe vantage point, you can look back now over the path we have walked. A crowded temple courtyard where a dagger flashed and vanished. The cold courtyard of a mountain fortress where envoys set out on long journeys. A roadside camp where a knotted cloth was hidden under a thin pillow. A tea house heavy with incense and oaths. A hill village where feuds bent the path of lives. A boarding house room with curling wallpaper and pamphlets strewn like fallen leaves. In each place, small groups of people decided that killing selected individuals was a necessary craft and not merely a crime. In each place, others looked on in fear and tried to give these shadows clear names. Now let us gently close those doors. One by one, the lamps in those rooms go out. The fire by the roadside sinks into ash. The fortress on the mountain becomes just another dark shape against the skies. The boarding house cools, and the last whisper in its narrow hall fades. All those societies and cells and brotherhoods belong to their own times. Their stories have travelled to you through the long, unreliable chain of memory, manuscript and myth. You have walked past them like a quiet visitor in a museum after hours, seeing the outlines without needing to step into their danger. Around you now is your own room, with its familiar shapes and gentle sounds. No oaths are required here. No decisions carry the weight those small circles once felt. The only task ahead is rest. You can imagine gathering all those shadows from history, all those secret meetings and sworn promises, and letting them drift away like smoke and cool air. What remains is simple: the softness of your bed, the steady rhythm of your breathing, and the reassuring sense that the only society you have to join tonight is the unremarkable, peaceful company of people who are finally, quietly falling asleep. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.